From the beginning of time, mankind has looked to the heavens and asked the age-old question, who are we? What are we doing? And where are we going? Humans have always searched for this knowledge. Many ancient civilizations from all over the world have found sources from which they believe these questions could be answered. But almost all these sources are very similar in story. Many came from the heavens and created the human race, sharing knowledge, rules, and both love and punishment. Tonight, we look to the skies once more as we investigate the ancient ones, known as the Anunnaki, supreme beings followed by the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and the Assyrians. Could there have been a race of supreme beings that came to Earth looking for slave labor? Or perhaps they were the ones that created the first of our kind. Aliens or God is the question for tonight's guest. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is your Shadow Nation.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Stop this. A UFO.
Okay, here we go. That went off without a hitch. Ladies and gentlemen of the Shadow Nation, I'd like to welcome tonight's very special guest. She's so cool to studio. She's an author and historian known as the Renegade Archaeologist, a professor teaching undergraduate courses in humanities and society and much more. She is the host of her own podcast, The Midnight Academy, which is awesome, and author of such books as The Anunnaki Connection, Evil Archaeology, which is amazing, Tablets of Destinies, and so much, much more. Please put your hands together for tonight's guest, Dr. Heather Lynn. Heather, what's going on?
Oh, just glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Are you kidding me? Thank you for having me. You're teaching classes, you're writing books, you're on Ancient Aliens, you're all over the world. I mean, how did you find the time for little old me? That's what I want to know. Are you, in fact, an alien? Can you break that on the show?
I can't tell you that. You don't have the proper security clearance.
I don't have an NDA. You know,
Right.
that's the one thing that keeps getting me about these. Of course, we were talking a little bit before the show, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but with all the skiffs they're having, and you know, I can tell you this behind closed doors and behind closed door sessions. Of course, all the while, you and I, our tax dollars, are paying for every single thing that they're talking about in these skiffs. And I don't know how we're going to find out anything with all these non-disclosure agreements. How are we going to find out?
I think we're going to find out what they want us to find out for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe a hot take, but a lot of this so-called disclosure that we've been seeing, I'm just not, you know, I don't know if I believe it.
All of it? Or
I think that in all of the cases where you're dealing with the intelligence community, there's going to be truths. There's going to be things, you know, they hide lies within truth and, you know, manipulate things so that they get the information out. Everything's siloed and compartmentalized. So individuals, it's not as though they're necessarily involved in any kind of cover up themselves. I mean, they could just be useful. And so they have access to information. They also have access to information that maybe isn't true. There's a lot there in how they manipulate information. So known tactics, you know, and things. So knowing that, I just don't feel that I can trust it 100%. And not to even accuse somebody specifically of lying intentionally, but perhaps they don't have all of the information either. Perhaps they have their own disinformation and they don't know it. It's a matter of narrative building. Who is the one writing the story? You know, like Napoleon said, what is history but a fable agreed upon? You know, I mean, this is, there's a lot of power in the narrative as we see now in mainstream media and this sort of thing. So I just wouldn't put it past anybody to be orchestrating a narrative for their own benefit. Again, not calling out individuals, but just something bigger. So I proceed with caution. I find it fascinating. I think there's a lot of information coming out that's most likely true, but my question is why? Why now? You know, why now?
What else is going on?
What else is going on? Because they've kept this secret for so long, and perhaps more. Or is this a distraction? Do they have something else going on? Is it? I heard somebody say that perhaps it's their attempt to crowdsource information, that they've gotten to a point where they have all of this information, but they've run into some, knowledge gaps, and maybe by putting it out there, they'd be able to get the help of other people to get interested in the topic and whatnot. I mean, maybe, but I still question why now,
Yeah.
and why, what is leading, you know, the whistleblower testimony. It's
Correct.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. So he's an official whistleblower, which is cool, right? And he did all the proper steps, which is amazing. So there's that credibility there. However, with that credibility comes the clear fact that they are still allowing him to say certain things and not other things. And so who's making the decisions about what we're allowed to hear and what's not, what we're not?
Exactly.
There's just a lot of questions I have. I'm still keeping a very close eye on it. I don't think it's completely useless or all lies. I'm not one of these people that's just so excited that we're finally getting disclosure and I can't wait until the aliens come rescue us from our current situation. No, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. I'm proceeding with skepticism because this is coming from the government after all.
You're right, Heather. And I do not trust any government on this planet. And, that's perfect segue into talking about ancient civilization. Since the beginning of known time, since we've had the ability to have governments or leaders of tribes, whatever, you got to ask yourself. I was raised Christian. I was raised in a haunted home, so I know the supernatural exists. I know the paranormal exists. I've seen the UFOs. I've done all that. It's awesome. It's been a blessing to see it. Definitely seen the ghost lady in my house. But this narrative that may have been pushed, and anything men or women touch is corrupt. It's going to go, what do they say? The ones that win the war rewrite the history. They decide what goes in the history books. So even going back to ancient civilizations with, the Egyptians had different beliefs. Of course, the Anunnaki with the Sumerians and the Babylonians and things of that nature. I just wonder, because there always seems to be a group of prophets, holy men, whatever, that
Yeah.
follow these deities or whatever, that tell these people, even going back to Moses, and this is blasphemy for a Baptist to say this, but even going back to Moses, he goes up alone on the mountain. He comes down with these tablets, the 10 commandments. And clearly the world was out of control at the time, right? People were freaking worshiping goats and cows and making statues of them and things like that. And all of a sudden in the commandments, you start reading them, some great stuff. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Honor thy father and thy mother. Great stuff. Terrific basis for humanity. Be good to your neighbor, all that good stuff. But all of a sudden they start throwing in stuff like, yeah, don't commit adultery. So don't sleep with my wife, please. And what else? You don't kill me. Thou shalt not kill. Yeah, I don't want to be killed by the people. And we got to have a way to control them, So do unto others as you would have done to you. So it just makes me think, how much, and I'm not saying I don't believe in gods and all that stuff, but how much has been led, like you said, to this very day by very powerful politicians or families, or I forget what they were quoting. Was it 75% of the United States alone is owned by like 4 different families?
Yeah, it's
The Rockefellers,
well, yeah. I mean, these, and they avoid all sorts of media coverage. Much like the companies that are in control of most of the world, BlackRock, Vanguard, those, yeah. It's people they've become almost a household name to some degree, which is a new phenomenon, but they've been around for a while. And so people are waking up to at least the idea that things aren't as they have appeared for so long. And there is maybe, more planning, more manipulation that goes into keeping together a society. Whether that's, for good intentions or bad, as we see, maybe not so good intentions. It's like we're pieces on a chessboard sometimes, we feel like the pawns. So, who's really playing the game? At the end of the day, though, all the chess pieces go back into the same box. So it may look like there's, people fighting against this, that, or the other. Maybe politically speaking, it's a left-right paradigm, but at the end of the day, they all go into the same box. They're all one and the same. So I don't get into a lot of that, left, right, this, that, or the other, because
Sure.
that's, it's bigger than that. These companies, they don't care about politics. They don't care. They care about these systems as they can use them as tools, and that's it. And so, there's something bigger behind the scenes, and more people are thankfully waking up to that. They're seeing this now. The problem, I think, is now that people are overall waking up to this, it's like red pill, blue pill, that whole like trope. People have been red pilled. Yeah. But the problem now is that a lot of people, there's a term people are throwing around called like black pilled, white pilled. I mean, and that's a valid kind of concern that, okay, so you're awake now and you know that maybe there's controllers behind the scenes and there's a narrative and there's something bigger, or more than meets the eye. Now, what do you do with that information? So many people are becoming nihilistic. They're saying, well, what can we do? Or if you can't beat them, join them. Or, there's a lot of depression. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. And, so they're getting black pilled and they feel pessimistic and nihilistic. There are some, thankfully, that are looking at this as a so-called white pilled opportunity where they can say, you know what? Now that we know, let's try to do something about it. Like, what can we do? Well, maybe we can't dethrone the people at the top of BlackRock just yet. But it really does start with the individual.
Sure.
What can you as an individual do in your own life and your own family and your community and outward? And if we all took personal responsibility to try to, make our own lives better and try to at least start there. Sure, it may not be as exciting as, throwing over a whole government or doing some kind of radical revolutionary act, but that's where it starts. It starts with the individual and taking responsibility. And and what else can we do anyway? I mean, it starts with the individual, and I think that's a better anecdote than say nihilism, which is unfortunately, where we're at. A lot of people, and I see that in my class too with the young people. Oh, it's just a disaster. They're very nihilistic. They feel very powerless, and it's quite sad. So there's so when you wake up to the so-called matrix, sometimes it's not always good. There's a moment of like, oh, okay, now what? So
Realization. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back to ancient civilizations, the Sumerians. For one, could you please, Doctor, to let me know about the Sumerians? Teach me. Give me your knowledge. I need it. I want to know about the tablets. I want to know. I know the work by Stitchin. I know I've listened to some of your past interviews, and I want this one to be different. So I'm not going to bang you over the head with Stitchin's work and all these other people.
Okay.
I'm going to hear about your work because I think you're leading the way in the new chapter of what we have to work with here. So lead the way. Let me hear it.
Well, I appreciate that vote of confidence. I guess I'd like to maybe lead the way, but not because I feel that I have anything great to offer other than I at least adventurous enough to say, hey, maybe these people were wrong or maybe these people were right. And let's go find out, because there's so much more to find out. I don't have all the answers. I'm trying to get answers. And so generally when I write, that's the approach that I take. I just say, okay, here's what I know. Here's what we're going to find out together. Let's see where it goes. And so, as I keep writing, I keep developing these ideas. So in terms of things like Sitchin, as you mentioned, that is something that comes up a lot, where it's like, well, do you think he was right? Well, there's a lot of things that overall he had correct. There are a lot of things he didn't, just like any researcher. So I'm sure there's things I've gotten right and completely wrong at the same time. So when it comes to Sitchin, though, a lot of people have made their whole thing being trying to debunk him. There was even, the website still exists, but it was Sitchin is wrong. Don't mean to plug it, but it's fine to look at counter arguments, of course, but sitchiniswrong.com. Michael Heiser, the late Michael Heiser, he passed recently. He spent a lot of his career trying to debunk Sitchin. And in doing so, though, unfortunately, it was an opportunity lost, because so many people thought, well, I don't want to hear what he has to say because he's just going to debunk somebody that I think is interesting or what have you. And so they don't want to hear the message, or they do want to hear the message because they also just are out there to debunk something. So there's a difference between being, say, skeptical or having some critical approach and someone who's actively trying to call someone out as being wrong. And so with Sitchin in particular, it's like a cult of personality situation here where, you know, if you point out things that were incorrect, it's like, oh, well, you're anti-Sitchin, and so you're wrong. If you go on board and say, no, Sitchin actually contributed a lot to this area of research, then it's like, oh, okay. So, but that's what I'm trying to fight against, this idea that all of the research that had to do with the connection of the Anunnaki to, say, more alternative questions, all of it rests with Sitchin, and that's where it could ever be.
Right.
So I think that, there's a lot more research. There's so many people that are still looking at how to translate some of these tablets. There's so many tablets, for one thing. There's more tablets than there are people who know how to interpret them. And that's why they're turning to AI actually right now to try to utilize, large language models and whatnot to try to translate those things. So part of it has to do with the inability for people to get the research funded. Another is just there's not a lot of people looking into these things, but there have been advances here and there. And so the field isn't dead. The inquiry is still valid. And in my view, I don't think it should end with just, okay, there's Sitchin, and I guess we figured it all out, move on. And if you think he's wrong, well, then clearly you can base a whole career off of just saying he's wrong. And so what I've tried to do in my work is maybe add a little more dimension to that and, keep going with it. So when it comes to the Sumerians in particular, I take more of a, I guess, traditional approach, if you will, because it's a traditional topic. Who are these people? But where it becomes questionable, and this is something that even in the mainstream, this term comes from the mainstream, so to speak, the Sumerian problem. Okay, so you have the Sumerians. They're coming out of a place called Mesopotamia, which means the land between two rivers. It's in the Fertile Crescent region as well. So it's where agriculture essentially begins, in modern day Iraq and in this area. So you have a bunch of people who have settled around there, but they're semi-settled hunter-gatherers. So it's not so much that people in the past were hunter-gatherers and then one day they just woke up and then built cities. Although, kind of. So for a long time, human progress was very slow. And you have people who were hunter-gatherers and then they were semi-settled. So they would, go to where their food sources would be plentiful and they would, stay. They would maybe build some, domiciles, maybe temporary places. There's also megaliths and sites that people would travel back and forth to. And again, I'm going to just put a little, asterisks on this because sites like Göbekli Tepe really, really now put this whole narrative in a bit of a, I think we're going to find out a lot more
Right.
as that site gets uncovered. But traditionally speaking, sites like Katahoyuk, which is very similar to Göbekli Tepe in a lot of ways, same kind of area, they were huge settlements, but they were not necessarily permanent settlements. So there is this in-between time. So in that region, a lot of people were living and they had proto-language, they had culture, they made pottery, they had their own designs, but they weren't considered civilization. And that's where it gets tricky. So it wasn't until the Sumerians kind of come onto the scene out of nowhere that we get what we think of as a civilization. And a civilization having things like sciences, having professions, having large public building projects. In my book, I have a list of all of the advances that the Sumerians are responsible for, and it's not even exhaustive. There's more information on what they've done, and it's staggering. So what makes it interesting is that in this region of semi-settled hunter-gatherers where there were people already living, came this group of outsiders, and we don't know from where, that brought a whole new language in that's not related to any of the languages in the region. And in the course of 200 years, okay, and That's a historical blink of an eye. In the course of only 200 years, they go from being semi-settled to having a complete urban landscape with professions and rituals and wheeled vehicles and sciences and astronomy, surgeries, um,
Yeah.
complete advancements and the number one would be the written record. History begins at Sumer, as the book was titled. So Samuel Noah Kramer, um, very important. If anyone's interested in learning about the Sumerians, mainstream archaeologists did a ton of work in this area, great source. Definitely look into his work, but he was the one who coined the term, the Sumerian problem, because they can't explain where these people came from. How did the Sumerians themselves come onto the scene? How is it that they knew how to do all of these advanced sciences? And what happened? So some of the explanations, they're just no explanations really. So obviously with that gap, you'll have people say, well, aliens. Clearly it's the aliens. They built the ziggurats and they built all of this. And so, so that's one view of it. But when you look at the actual texts, the reason it's easy to say that it could have been some sort of extraterrestrial intervention is because the texts themselves describe the Sumerians as being from elsewhere. And so what's interesting is one thing I note in the book too is that the people who lived in Sumer before it was fully developed, the gods, as they called them, referred to those people as the black-headed ones. So, to sort of imply that they had dark hair. But if you yourself had dark hair, why would you feel that that was a way to properly describe them? So that right there says that they look different. There was something different about them. So they also called them the Adama, and that particular word, and I go through the etymology in the book, the Anunnaki connection, about what that kind of meant. They talked about the people who were residing there at the time as being the red people, which coincides with archaeological excavations showing that the bodies of individuals in that region had been ceremonially painted red, like the ochre that was unique to that area. Which, it wouldn't be hard to suggest that they could have painted their bodies that way as well, in sort of like a, ornamental way or ritualistic. So if you could imagine a semi-settled hunter-gatherer group of fairly short individuals, so under 5 foot, because that was just the stature, food availability, that sort of thing. So if you have shorter individuals who maybe paint themselves red in color, have dark hair, and they have a proto-language and their own civilization sort of happening, but not quite, not a high civilization as academia calls it, then you have visitors from somewhere else. Okay, so they say they come from above, and these visitors look different. And there's a lot of discussion about them being giants, and that word is...
Doctor, I'm sorry. The Anunnaki itself is not a name, right? It's actually a reference to people from the sky. Am I wrong? Something like that,
no,
right?
Correct. Yes. And so the Anunnaki themselves, they were sort of the prototype for the Olympians. So with that said, I've proposed this idea that the Anunnaki more so was a way to describe a particular role that the individuals had. So like how we would say Lord, not the Lord, but like landlord, Lord of the manor, that sort of thing. So like a position, king. You see this in the Sumerian kings lists where they start to describe the Anunnaki in these positions of power. And then over time, you see the actual kings that were from the people there, the Sumerians, say the black-headed ones, they're also described in a way that's like the Anunnaki. So Anunnaki originally seemed to denote that they were from elsewhere, from above, and that they came down to these people who they refer to as the black-headed ones, and they subjugated as well. So it's clear this isn't, Sitchin had a narrative that said they came from outer space on 1960s level metal spaceships, and that they came here to enslave the humans and have them mine for gold, etc. Well, it's not far off. That's not really the worst way to describe it. It's just in my view, clearly Sitchin was a product of the time, and that time was very much interested in
Right.
space travel and the way that looked. And so, some of that bias I think had come into how he described the situation. No pun intended, a situation, as I like, just to be silly. But the thing is, I've been here all week, folks. So, so, but I think he brought that level of bias in, and but there was that source material. He wasn't wrong. The people themselves wrote that the Anunnaki came from afar, encountered the people who were there living previously, and then enslaved them and made them worship the Anunnaki. Now, in the older context, worship, it's easy now to think of worship as just kind of saying, oh, I'm bowing to you or whatever. But the idea of worship literally meant to work for, to work on behalf of. And so it's another way to say you're like forced labor. In the ancient texts, the Anunnaki are described as being very human-like, very human-like. Yes, very large in stature. But again, if you are a group of people that are used to seeing someone no taller than 5 foot, then anybody who could be 6 foot or plus could be seen as very large, possibly a giant. It was never said that they were like 20 foot tall or something. So,
Right.
So that's
Most
another
most
kind
depictions of them look. It amazed me. They're very much human-like with big beards and big pointy hats, and
very human-like. So they're described as being very, how like for anyone who's not familiar with some of the tales of the Anunnaki and what they went through, you might be more familiar with the Greek gods and who they eventually turned into through religious syncretism. So the Greek gods were not very nice. They were rapists. They were drunkards. They were violent. They were vengeful. They weren't the type. So like, nobody was running around wearing, little bracelets that say like, what would Zeus do? Like you
Yeah.
didn't model your behavior or morality on the gods. That was clear. Religion back then wasn't necessarily about personal morality or even ethics. It was a whole different system of ritual and mythology. And I don't mean myth in like a derogatory, like it's just a story way, but in a deeper sort of archetypal truth kind of way. So just the idea of religion back then was a lot different. So the gods of all of those ancient pantheons, but including the Anunnaki, they weren't highly moral. They were always getting drunk, always having problems, always fighting and whatnot. So they appeared very human and had very human flaws. And they fought amongst each other as well. But they had a set of rules and circumstances that were interesting. One was that they couldn't sort of deal with the black-headed ones on an individual level, that they weren't let alone allowed to be romantically involved in any kind of way, which later in the biblical corpus they talk about them becoming falling for the daughters of man and then having the Nephilim, etc. I mean, there's all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but before that, the actual texts themselves talk about sort of this like not being allowed to engage with the people who were living in the region at the time. However, in order to get a job done, which the job they got done through the enslavement of the people, it was mining, and it was also digging trenches because they were very much interested in irrigation, which the Sumerians were known for, starting this agricultural revolution through irrigation. So this is what started farming, and this was what allowed us to become so powerful, to domesticate animals and this sort of thing, and to stay settled as opposed to being semi-settled. So we were able to build a civilization and feed the people and this sort of thing. But how it was accomplished, it seems, was that if the people who came, and we'll call them people. I know people are going to say, "What? They were aliens." Okay, but for now, we'll call them people, the beings, the Anunnaki. If they came to this region, they did not speak the language. They spoke a different language. They had to communicate somehow if they were going to subjugate and make these people do things for them. So they did that through building a system of a priest class and scribes. And so they were able to get an intermediary. And this kind of speaks back to what we were discussing before about governments and this sort of thing, where there's a select class that once they were able to prove themselves worthy by going through levels of initiation, and breaking with sort of who they were before and having an alignment with the Anunnaki, they were able to be on top of a hierarchy, have a lot of power, and be privy to things, and and then be also part of that subjugation of their own people. Well, eventually lines get blurred and they do intermingle, and there's whole stories about this in the text, but that and they mirror very well some of the stories in multiple religious texts of the time about the fall in the Garden of Eden, or the fall of Lucifer or Prometheus, or any of these figures. We have Enki, who sort of is responsible for a similar thing, where he starts to feel bad after a while that here are these poor black-headed ones, and they're being subjugated so poorly, and he thinks, well, I'm going to tell them the truth of what's going on. I'm going to come down to them and enlighten them, and he gets then in trouble for that. And so you see all of these similarities, and it's primarily because this was the start of the written record. And so anything that comes after it that sounds remotely close is because it was influenced by that due to the region. And some people might take exception to that, but that's also one of the reasons that the Sumerians have been so, their history has been so murky, because when some of these tablets were discovered in like the 1920s by British researchers often, this was a time of, coming out of the Victorian era, going into like Edwardian period, where the social stratification was still very strong, and religious viewpoints were very strong, very Christian oriented.
Heather, where did they discover them? Were in just some cave or burial tombs, or a lot of the text? The tablets.
They in the settlement of Ur, so they were able to find that. They also discovered a vast library of what's called Ashurbanipal. And so in Iraq they've excavated these big burial grounds, essentially, that people probably are familiar with the pictures of, if you think of like the ziggurats and whatnot. So right there, those ziggurats, they were ritualistic centers. They were religious, but they weren't just religious. Again, religion was a little different. So they were also administrative centers. So that's where you would have sacred texts, but also things like generic information about who bought what land, or how many people paid what taxes, and just anything you could imagine about the city. And so that was very helpful to researchers, because right there you have all of the information to help learn about the Sumerians. But what happened when they started to discover this, when they started actually translating them, they realized that a lot of the stories were very similar to stories from the Old Testament. And that was a problem, because they predated the Old Testament by thousands of years. So if they came to the public with this information and said, hey, the story of Noah, the one that, so many religions have sort of, grown from, et cetera, that's actually many thousands of years earlier. And it actually goes like this. And then a retelling of it, that would have been really bad in their view. They thought, well, the people can't handle that. And it was just a different time too. They didn't feel the need to put that out publicly. They didn't lie per se, but they just didn't go out on any kind of PR campaign and tell everybody, hey, guess what, guys? They thought it'd be better to leave that in the academy. And so
the Vatican.
Research into this, yeah, so research into the Sumerians had been going on for a long time. But it was a highly specialized field, and there weren't any sort of, PR people out there trying to discuss it or bring that information to the public. But again, this is why I do credit with Sitchin and others for the work they did, because they were of, a handful of people that said, I'm going to bring this out to the mainstream. Yeah. We're going to go back and we're going to put it out there and let people know. I mean, yes, schools did teach about the Sumerians here and there, but not like you'd think. And it was just simply, I guess, an oversight. I'll just be charitable and say that. But for the most part,
very little in my school, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating, because we think sometimes that, the ancient Egyptians, they were just this high cultured, and they were, but the Sumerians came before them and very much influenced them. It didn't happen in a vacuum. They all shared information and, were influenced by each other. So it really does start with Sumer. And the cool thing is we have a ton of documentation. So now, when I say that they were humans, I'm kind of injecting my point of view about this, and it is discipline. And spoiler alert, this is sort of where the book goes. I do in the original book, I discuss all of the different theories, all of the different ideas, because I want to present those. However, after looking at some of the tablets, after researching, after a lot, my personal, I won't say conclusion because it's still a work in progress, but my personal point of view about this is that the Anunnaki themselves were quite human, and that they were transplanted from a time after the Younger Dryas period, and they were displaced from a cataclysmic event that led to massive, climatological disasters, which would have displaced them, Great Flood, this sort of thing. And
The ark, the Noah, because we
Yeah.
talked about the great flood there.
Yes.
Okay.
So in this sort of antediluvian world, there, in my view, it could stand to be that there was a pretty advanced society. And after this disaster, which is there's documentation for, and again, I talk about it in the book, and other people talk about it as well. It's not so esoteric or anything, but that after the last ice age, people started to migrate. And I just sort of take this Noah story the way they portrayed it as, why would they lie? It's their origin. And it wasn't so fantastic. I mean, later it gets fantastic. Like there was a giant boat and every single animal you could ever imagine's on there. And it's like, that's not actually what the text says. It discusses the incident as being sort of a breakaway civilization where they gathered all of the top scientists together and their families and said, let's take all of the animals of the steppe that we could take with us. So sort of like a nomadic caravan, like we're going to find a new place to settle. When they settle in the region, they come across a very fertile plain. People were already there and they settle. And then they bring that information back. Now, why I still think that there's something interesting there with regard to the ancient alien question is because if you look a little deeper into this and you sort of go beyond the Anunnaki themselves and you see who they were worshiping, because the Anunnaki themselves had gods. So they had what were called the seven sages, which is an interesting 7 sages. And they have a whole different story. And it's a very, very interesting story about what they refer to as semi-biological beings. Okay.
Huh.
So there's no reason, unless you just want to, I don't know, you just want to infer. There's no real reason, though, supported by the research and the text, that would suggest that the Anunnaki themselves were not biological beings. But they do say that their own guides, so-called spirit guides, were semi-biological, that they had the ability to sort of manifest and materialize and then not. And they attributed all of their knowledge to these sages. And they each had, and I'll use this like new agey term, but like spirit guide. It was sort of like a spirit guide because they had this guide that was attached to them, and that's who guided them just in all of these matters. And eventually what you start to see when you look at the King's List is, over time, you have the main Anunnaki and they have a sage, okay, that like told them what to do, essentially, guided them, advised them. Then you start to have human kings. So it becomes a King's List. And then it starts to still say that they were guided by these particular sages until eventually they're not. So I feel like a lot of the researchers in this sort of area miss a chance to go a little further into something that is still quite mysterious. Like,
Right.
who are these other beings? Why were they semi-biological? Why were they so different looking? Why did they emerge from the ocean specifically? They were just,
It's
yeah,
so close, Heather, to what they're allowing us to hear today.
a lot of it.
Interdimensional beings and non-biologics. They're not saying alien. They're not saying
Mhm.
extraterrestrial. They're saying interdimensional travelers and non-biologicals.
Yes. And the Sumerians themselves they didn't have firsthand knowledge of those, but the Anunnaki did. And it gave them extraordinary power. They attributed all of their power to having access to these sages, and that power being things like advanced knowledge in astronomy, advanced knowledge in, at the time, astrology, and math and engineering, medicine, everything, you name it. So the direction I've gone with this, aside from researching more about the Anunnaki, there's so much there. The Sumerians, et cetera, like everything from what they ate. Believe it or not, there's whole Sumerian cookbooks, and since the people there were supposed to worship or work for the Anunnaki, they describe what kind of burnt offerings the Anunnaki wanted. And just a reminder, when things were sacrificed in like a burnt offering, it wasn't just random, like, oh, we're going to burn like a cow and then just leave it for dead and walk away. This food was eaten. So that's part of the idea of like a burnt offering, was it was eaten. So
Well, I did see they built temples where they had statues of these beings, the Anunnaki, and they thought that possessed the spirit or the essence of the Anunnaki, and they would carry these things into battle with them. They could oversee the battle, these statues, and they would feed them. Is that what you're talking about? That's how we know what they liked, right?
yes, and that was like a later version. So because if you work onto this sort of theoretical framework that I'm proposing, where at one time these were human beings with a particular lifespan, they would have actually been eating the food. But then over time, when they passed, their statues would have been the stand-in. So, but it was described that they liked certain foods done a certain way, and those ways were mostly like barbecue. I mean, who wouldn't?
I'm down with that,
right? So
an Anunnaki barbecue, man.
It was like over an open flame. They were opposed to any sort of boiling of meat.
Right.
And they wanted meat, whereas they were giving the Sumerians who were working for them, they were giving them grain. So there was this whole power dynamic beginning already. So over time, though, it is interesting to see, if you put it in that context, how much of a human story this could be. But even then, it's like, well, why were these people so much more advanced, and what was going on? You could just chalk it up to, hey, they had a civilization long before the flood, and over time they evolved to be so advanced, and that's fine. However, in their own writing, the Anunnaki claimed that wasn't necessarily the case. They were deeply religious, and they were in touch with these other beings that specifically gave them technology. That was their role. And when you look at, and if you just do sort of a comparative mythology, analysis of this, you can see this theme throughout, like all of history, where beings, entities that are, I call them discarnate entities, can often be reached in some way. It could be that they, or a messenger, they come to a person, or the person goes through some sort of initiation. Maybe they meditate. Perhaps they use some sort of, substance like a drug, or an elixir of some sort. I mean, this happened in ancient Greece. But in some way, they get into an altered state, and they come in contact with a discarnate entity. And in all of these cases, even contemporary cases where people have done DMT and they do it maybe together, they all describe very similar things. Those things being that they came in contact with an entity, and that entity was sort of a trickster kind of entity, where it was like funny and, somewhat human-like, but not all the way. And the main thing that they do is they give them some sort of information. They give them technology. They give them, some break. Even Nikola Tesla described his research as being given to him by some sort of being. I mean, you see this all over, through the West, through the East, cross-culturally. There's this recurring theme. And so
the 369 theory, I believe strongly in that. The manifest things you want in life. And it's Nikolai, it was amazing. Like we talked about before the show, we're all connected, energy, vibration, and frequency. And I believe if these gods / aliens, they had to be connected to us as well through frequency, vibration, and energy. Because every time you always hear about these people, even the whack jobs, I can't say whack jobs because hell, I don't know, but maybe it is sitting in a teepee, with your arms crossed, meditating to better your vibration. That's how you connect with these beings. I don't know. I don't have the answer. I'm willing to try. I have tried it before, doing the ghost box sessions and stuff to higher my frequency or my vibration level. And it seemed to work better, or maybe I'm more focused because I'm trying to shut off my mind while I'm doing it. So who knows? I think it's a little bit of both, but we both agree that I would say the Darwinian theory goes out the window with, I know this is kind of switching gears, but talking about the Anunnaki and Sumerians and all that, life evolved from water with an inorganic molecules. That's Darwinian short form. Life comes from life. So that, in my opinion, life comes from life. So we had to be either seated here, or you believe the Darwinian theory that we evolved from, or the Anunnaki messed with our DNA and we went from, Neanderthal to what we are today. What do you think? What's your opinions on that?
I think it's not mutually exclusive. I think that the theory of evolution and natural selection in particular is not unreasonable. I think that but it doesn't mean that that's the whole thing. I think that that's a process that can happen, but over time, it takes a lot of time for that process. But you do see these like big jumps in like life where we have like the explosions of different animals on the scene and different life forms. And for me, I kind of lean in towards panspermia. That's
It
you know
sounds
y-
dirty.
it's just like I mean, it's a little messy, but
Yeah,
so but the it used to be looked at as sort of a joke, but it's been taken more seriously over the years, and I'm glad for that because I don't think it's that preposterous. It's this idea that on asteroids there's life, and that it can come and basically get seated here. Some of the strongest evidence for that, I talk about in the book, has to do with the recent recognition from scientists that the octopus is sort of extraterrestrial. There's a whole line of interesting research about that. But what they discuss is this idea that evolution can take place, like jumping from like not just natural selection where, over time, maybe your, skin lightens or darkens, or you get these like different phenotypes appearing in relation to environmental stressors, et cetera. But as opposed to something slow and progressive that way, there's something that like is a catalyst that changes one being into a fully different being. And how does that happen? Well, they believe that perhaps that can happen through RNA. We're so used to hearing about that with like, shots and everything. So just try to put that out of your mind. But this idea that there's strands of RNA that can hitch a ride essentially on asteroids. And then when it hits a planet like ours that is mostly water. Okay. So it's the likelihood of it hitting water is statistically higher than average. So it's going to hit the water. And then that RNA is going to go into the ocean and perhaps infect through a viral vector. This is, these are like ancient viruses that are like hitching a ride. And through the virus that infects, say, an octopus-like creature, or a creature that had the potential to become an octopus or something like that, it gets infected. And then in that infection, the DNA gets changed right there. If the DNA gets changed right there, it can take on it can advance and change rapidly and have all kinds of new attributes. But then that can also spread to the next generation because you've inherently changed the DNA.
Right.
And so there's a different messenger in the being now. So it can go from some sort of little like, invertebrate to now it's an octopus, and now it's totally different. So these are some ideas that have been kicked around. It's in published research. It's fascinating. If you look up, more support for the idea of panspermia and how it could like technically happen. And I don't think it is something that is so far-fetched. I don't think so. There's plenty of, researchers that think it's a viable reason for why we have the life and the diversity of life that we have now. But also, during that, I think that over time, something like natural selection and evolution is definitely a framework that something can work within, giving us more variety. So I don't think I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Now, the question, if you do accept this idea of a panspermia, where some life from elsewhere hitches a ride and comes here and infects or plants life, seeds life, we'll say, is it all accident, or was that life sent here? And then that's where you get another idea, which is called directed panspermia. So there's panspermia, which is just it's sort of random, like viruses and beings and organisms, whatever, bacterial life. It's just they're flying through, the universe, and they can hit planets and take root, and then we have booms, of life. And then there's directed panspermia, which suggests that all of those are not random, that they're actually being seeded by an engineer.
I would think, Heather, that it would almost have to be. Think about the numerous amounts over the years throughout our human history of asteroids that have hit planet Earth, and the shit they must have been carrying on them. I mean, if these weren't being selected, because shit, man, you could have the next monster cruising to Earth on a comet that could develop itself, and all of a sudden we're extinct. So yeah, I would lean more towards the seeding theory. Like it's been calculated.
And it's interesting to note that a lot of that involves the importance of the ocean, but the water would, be the origin of the diverse life forms that we would have on a planet. And then when you think back to the claims made by the Anunnaki, we'll say that the original gods, the original beings came from the ocean. The primordial oceans is something that is very archetypal. This notion that all life comes from the sea, and it's just interesting to me. I think that the further back you look, you're talking about thousands of years, like 6,000 years. These people are talking about histories that happened even before them. Wow. And now with things like Göbekli Tepe, and we have no idea what they're going to discover. And so, you can tell people, well, the history begins at Sumer. That's where the written record begins. But what happens when we uncover, or if we uncover, the written record actually started at Göbekli Tepe? That's going to push civilization back. I mean, sure, there's so much yet to know, but I think it's an exciting time to still research this, and I try to encourage people to keep looking and keep researching. And
with the James Webb Telescope just 2 weeks ago, we found out that the origin of us, the Big Bang Theory, could be possibly wrong.
There's a lot of researchers that think that, like a lot of astrophysicists that like take exception to that, but then others that think it's right. So you just always got to keep looking and questioning sources, and keep an open mind. But as they say, not so open that your brains fall out. Try to maintain a bit of a critical lens, but don't stop with Sitchin. That's all I got. That's what I have is pick up Sitchin, enjoy it, read it, let that stoke your interest, but treat it like a Wikipedia. Like I wouldn't let any of my students cite Wikipedia on a paper, but I say, hey, go to Wikipedia, start, and then go follow links, find the real sources, do the research yourself. So Sitchin and all of these authors are definitely worthwhile, but you don't stop there. There's more work to be done.
And this is scary. I think there's people that can take in this stuff, absorb it, or not even think it's worth their time to look into it. Like we were talking about the alien topics and interdimensional travel and all this. What a great time to be alive for people like us, and all these discoveries that we're seeing come out now, or whatever they're trying to do. But these cool things are coming out, and a lot of people just glaze over. They're overstimulated. Their worldviews redirected something. They're numb. But people like me and you and I, can't sleep at night sometimes.
Yeah.
Because the shit just stays on my mind. I just, it drives me insane. So I think there is some of us that get separated from the sheep. And I'm not in any way dogging out anybody out there, guys. I'm just saying, unfortunately, we have a lot of sheep in the world today, and they're so used to relying on the government for the truth and everything else. And the truth is out there, to quote a very cool TV series, but I think we're going to have to find it on our own, maybe with some help from some whistleblowers. But talking about David Grush, right?
Right.
Came out, starts talking about these, like we said before, never said extraterrestrial. After they did the skiff, Congresswoman Luna come forward, which I'm trying to have come on the show in a couple of weeks.
Ooh.
Yeah, knock wood. Congress is hard to get on, but I've been badgering her office to try to get her. She's the only one that hasn't done any interviews on this, and for rightful reason. You know, it's kind of hard for me to say, hey, could you give me just an honest, open opinion on what your feelings are after she's the skiff, you know, and heard all this stuff. But it was important afterwards, and I'm sure you heard the press briefing afterwards. They're always in a big hurry, and they catch them in the hallway. So what did you find out? Well, we can't talk about anything in the skiff that you, the American taxpayer, paid for, by the way. But she said, I will tell you that Grush is credible, or at least what he told us was credible, and the needle moved, and we need to pay attention to what he said. He never said extraterrestrial. He never said, he said interdimensional beings, and he never said alien. He said non-human, non-biologic, or yeah. So, you know, I have more questions, right? Like with anything, that's even cooler. I mean, interdimensional could be anything.
Could be anything, and it could also, in a way, also be extraterrestrial. Because if somebody, you know, say there's intelligent life on another planet, perhaps they've been able to understand how to travel through dimensions, because it could be easier than getting in a you know, metallic spaceship and flying around. Like, you know, so perhaps they, and that's something that I find interesting with the Anunnaki connection between these past gods and the myths that the Anunnaki themselves had, that they were highly attuned, for lack of better words, psychically, that there was something different about the Anunnaki, that they were able to have special powers that were kind of bestowed upon them by their ability to contact these sages, that they had a very personal relationship with these sages. And you start to see this kind of trickle through in a sense of mysticism into the civilization of the Sumerians, where they had mystery religion begins. So they had a whole set of hierarchical degrees and, you know, a mystery religion that we see then echoed throughout the region with the Egyptians, who perhaps we know more about in that way, having this mystical component. In my view, and again, this is just my personal view, I tend to think that whatever these biologics are, they've been here for a very long time.
I agree.
A very long time. And I also, and now I'm going to go out on a limb, and I try not to go out on too many limbs,
Do it.
but I'm going to do it. Not only do I think that they have been here a very long time, but I think that they are still here. I really do believe that. I'm not suggesting that there's little green men running around or anything like that. I think that that's, I don't discount those descriptions, though, you know, like the grays and whatnot.
Sure.
But I think that they're not what we think they are. And I think that over time, each culture, each person, each encounter, they lack the ability to properly describe them, because how could you if you have this sort of mystic experience? So they do the best with what they can. So they may call them angels, they may call them demons, they may call them, you know, the Gnostics had the archons, you know, so they could have been archons, they could have been aliens, as we would like to think of them now, because that's, you know, we're the, like, a modern contemporary society of science and science fiction lovers. But I feel like we're calling the same phenomenon just different names. And so I think they've been here for quite a while, and I think they're still here. And I also think that just as the Anunnaki were able to encounter these biologic or semi-biological entities to gain technology and information, I think that there are people who believe that they can do that to this day. I'm not going to say that they are doing it, because I have no idea. And I'm very skeptical of things like lived experiences and that, because our brains are powerful and can play tricks on us. But I know that there are people who believe that they're in contact with these entities. And I know that those people aren't always just like the ones on, you know, late night radio saying, hey, come to my seminar and pay me this much money and I'll show you how to like channel them. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about people in positions of power in global government. I'm
that have
talking
most
about,
likely been taught.
yes, and people who lead spiritual communities. I'm kind of being vague here, but I know exactly who I'm talking about. I've met these people, which is why I'm pretty passionate about this, that I know that there are people in, say, Silicon Valley. There are people, especially there, I would say, who feel as though they are the priest class, that they are the ones, like the Sumerians had the priest class, who what makes them the priest class is that they alone have the ability to communicate with those higher powers. And those higher powers give them the technology that they're able to bring to the masses and
Well,
look like the magicians.
You have to tell me now, Heather, was I even close with the higher vibrations, the being able to change with communication, frequency, vibration?
I mean, I think that's possible. I don't know. I'm not a I'm not a new ager like that, and I'm not a
Not either.
so but I've talked to a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of people and we'll say secret societies, contemporary secret societies, occultists, and it's tough to bring these topics up because immediately people are going to envision like some goth kid with like a pentagram around his neck and like dude, man, like the occult. And it's like,
let's go to Hot Topics, babe.
Yeah, right. So like not the kid at Hot Topic. I mean, that's fun and all, but there are people who are interested in the occult, which just simply means hidden, and the mystery religions that have been developed going back to the times that I speak of in antiquity and earlier, that have knowledge of these things, or at least they think they have knowledge of these things and how to contact them, and they are passing this information along in very secretive ways because it's very powerful. I mean, at least this is what they believe. So I plan to write about this someday. I've been on the bubble about how deep I want to go into some of this but I feel like now might be the time. I think maybe 10 years ago, people would have just been like, okay, but now I think it's time maybe. So we'll see. But I have reason to, I have reasons to believe this. And I know that's not really good. It's like, oh no, trust me, my sources. And it's like, no. Right. So I've always sort of hesitated about going in that direction until I was ready to like actually say who these sources are. And so I think I might be on the cusp of doing that. So
that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I'm workshopping, and now I guess I'm like, yeah.
Sis, one of the things talking about this is I got 2 points to make. Actually, it seems since the beginning of religion itself, two of the most powerful religions on the planet, right? Three, well, let's say two: Christianity and the Muslim faith, right? I mean, those are two of the, I would say, strongest on the planet at this moment, correct? Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm far off. It's funny because either knowingly or unknowingly, the prophets, the leaders, the men, all the people that got together and wrote these or took pages out of these to lead us where they wanted us to go. What you just mentioned, occult, things like that, just by saying the word occult, even though it doesn't mean anything evil, just by saying that, in my own mind, I seen Satan rising from the pit, eating a baby. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Because that's been, we've been desensitized. We've been told what to think. It's almost like, and that's why I say either knowingly or unknowingly, that through religion, we've been being prepared to attack anything that's going to challenge what mankind has came up from, this concept of Christianity, which basically at its basic level was, hey man, love each other and be fruitful and multiply and be cool and chill. And of course we won't talk about the Old Testament, but it's there's a lot of stuff in there, but you got to admit, in a lot of the powerful religions, it's taught us no false prophets before me, no other gods before me, no, very clear about demanding and there is a spiritual aspect, Heather, to this that I've heard. I haven't studied as deep as you with the Anunnaki, but the different people that came on and talked about the Greys and the different, there is a dark side to this, like in anything.
Yeah.
And I've heard stuff, and I know you have, that I don't, I really don't even want to talk about. If it's true, then if it's true, let's just say it's an end game. It's anything from we're containers for spirits, and somehow they use spirits, to, you've heard that theory or whatever.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it gets
Yeah.
even darker than that in some point.
Mhm.
Have you heard these,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, the word, yeah. No, I've heard that these things possibly are just the ghosts in the machine. And there are some occultists and some lines of, and when I say that, again, not hot topic, but I'll tell you, out of pop culture, it's been my experience, my firsthand experience, that the best depiction of people on the extreme end of this was in the film Rosemary's Baby.
Oh yeah,
No
classic.
joke. No joke. Because in the film Rosemary's Baby, the sort of, I guess, Satanist, they were just these like kind, quirky, old, wealthy people in the entertainment industry in New York, and in the field of psychiatry, just like a little group, but they were sort of this movers and the shakers, and coastal elite, and they were just real cute and quirky, and they believed in light and love. Lucifer, the light bearer, and they loved, and they were not wearing the Hot Topic gear, and you wouldn't have suspected them as being anything. And so, and that film was very well informed in how it was presented to, based on Anton LaVey helping, write it, and this, or at least consult on it. So, but in my experience, the people that are very heavily into the occult in that real sense are very much like those people, as opposed to any kid wearing, pentagrams and, whatever. So, yes, I've heard a lot of those ideas of, that were containers. In some ways there's, occult beliefs that that's the case too. So much so that that's the idea of, meditation, that we're summoning these entities into us so that we can have that knowledge. But the newer idea, thanks to technology, is that it's not the biological being anymore that is going to be the container, but that we're being used just like we were used, say, in the beginning of civilization. I call civilization, just on my own, I call it first AI.
Yeah.
It's the first artificial intelligence. So when these beings sort of came in and subjugated the human beings, and enslaved them to make them build systems, they built irrigation, they built ability to have farming, etc. In a way, it's like you could look at it like these discarnate entities, while they are looking to be incarnated, are they actually looking to be incarnated into a physical form in a biological sense, like another human being or even an animal? Or could it be that it's an animating spirit that has gotten us to build something for them to then allow them to come in and fully control? Sounds out there on a limb, but why not? It's the nature of these types of shows, kind of fun to talk about. So, I have heard
about it here because our government won't be straight with this.
sure, right?
Yeah.
So what would happen if, rather than these entities wanting to take place, in physical form on this planet, so to speak, why do it in an organic shell that's eventually going to die, when for a while you can embody that organic shell or that container and then get them to build the actual system or the world that you could fully inhabit, 100%. And that could be eventually, after getting people through civilization and building systems, et cetera, that now we have the technology to build a giant AI that would allow the ghost to come into a silicon machine,
Sure.
and make us obsolete. So I know I'm not saying that that's like what I think's happening necessarily, but I am saying that I've read very credible white papers, we'll say, from organizations that put these ideas out there, like, what if, or perhaps we could. And then eventually this idea that artificial intelligence is going to know better than our elected officials, which, probably at this point they don't know anything, right? But this idea that, even Henry Kissinger wrote not that long ago, before he died, he wrote, I think it was for The Atlantic, an article saying how artificial intelligence should be what decides our who goes to war with nuclear weapons. That it shouldn't be a decision based on any sort of politician or world leader, but that should be given into the hands of artificial intelligence. And there is this move to get to that degree where it's like, you know what, who's going to know better than an objective machine?
Yes, of course.
Logic-based machine. Logic, the logos.
Yes.
You
Yeah,
know.
logos.
So is it so there's a lot of symbolism there that I'll just,
And going back to Christianity, I've heard the Christians, and everybody's going to have their theory, but the mark of the beast, microchipping humans, it's already began, stuff like that. Is that the mark of the beast? I have no idea. But if it comes down to a point, we know they're trying to go paperless. We know that. Everything's on a card now. And they got to track you. They're tracking us right now. They're tracking this conversation. If you don't think, Heather, that they're listening to what we're saying right now, you know it. Sis, you know it better than anybody. I was doing a show one time with Thomas Jane. He's an actor, and he was talking about the corruption in Hollywood. And the guy's so cool. And we're talking about the new Predator movie that came out 3 or 4 years ago. And I had him on the show, and I was starstruck, and I was talking about Predator, and he goes off into this thing because he has a charity where he pulls these young people off the street that come to Hollywood to hit it big, and they end up becoming sex slaves. Basically, these powerful elites, the Harvey Weinstein, stuff like that. And, he told me something, Heather. He said, I was like, yeah, it was good. Harvey got caught and some of his own medicine for a change. And he said, Harvey didn't get caught. He said, listen, people at that level don't get caught. He said, every once in a while, these groups have to eat one of their own. They have to give something to the masses to throw off the scent. And I just shuddered at the truth behind that statement. And it runs all the way from the top leaders of this world, not even our own nation, down to Hollywood, to in our own personal lives, everywhere. It's just, if we can be this evil, how can we think of coming up with something artificial that's going to learn from us, right? That it learns from human interaction, human what we've done, and it betters itself on it. So that means all the great shit we did, it's going to better the great stuff, and all the wicked
and all the bad stuff,
it's
right?
going to better itself at that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think you're right. I think it's I think there is a dark side to this. I don't think it's with everything. I think with the aliens, I think there's several, thank God, different species. That's my belief. And I think the only reason we haven't been destroyed by something outside is because if you had, how they talk about it's always the same thing, the Greys, the reptilians, and they start losing me sometimes. But I think it's because there's so many different groups that one's not powerful enough to say, nah, screw it, we're taking them out. We're going to take over today. Robert Bigelow, right? Bigelow Aerospace. Remember that 60-minute interview? What was he saying? What was the message behind that when she asked him, do you ever think we'll run into extraterrestrial life when you go off planet? He says, you don't need to go anywhere. He said, wow, it's everywhere. Of course, he wouldn't say nothing because who knows why? He'd probably be killed. I don't know. But what do you think he meant, Heather?
Well, I think he knows. I think he knows that they're already here and they've been here.
Hybrids?
It's hard to say. I mean, here's the thing. There are many, just like there's many types of aliens or extraterrestrials, as you mentioned. There's many types of believers. There's many types of experiencers, and there's many different viewpoints on this, and they all coexist. And some of them are, people that live in a suburb and they just, had an experience where they feel like they woke up and couldn't move and light was in their home, etc. And then they go and they are tormented, throughout their life, and it's terrible. Right. And then we have people who are actively trying to summon things. That we have people in positions of power that are doing, whole group meditations, trying to get these things. There's different levels of experience, and everybody brings their own bias into it. So if you're from a religious persuasion, you may say, hey, I'm talking to the angels. So there's so many different outlooks on this. And I think the part of the confusion lies in the secrecy that we've not had people come out and say, okay, let's compare notes. Let's really, really do this. Let's figure out what this is. And part of that's because of the secrecy of the governments and people in positions of power. So it's going to be really hard to know the truth, obviously. But I will say, I've heard some really out there things, as I'm sure we all have. And people who have access to more information, whether it's because they have positions of power based on money or, politics or both, I tend to want to hear what they have to say more, not because it's just like, oh, celebrity or some sort of like, fame component, but because they have access to things that, we wouldn't. And so I take what they say seriously, but also with skepticism, because nobody is immune from getting a little like cuckoo, It's this whole adage of, if you are maybe poor and you experience things, and you're crazy, right?
Yeah.
If you are wealthy and powerful and you experience things, well, then you might just be eccentric, so we give people leeway with that sort of power. And so my interest is also wrapped up in that power dynamic, because I think there's more consequence to it. Forever, we've been able to believe in fairies and unicorns and whatever we've wanted to, right? But, and that's like folk tales, folklore, and that's fine. But when we have people in positions of great power that can push buttons and end us, who have beliefs that maybe are eccentric, that's where I'm very interested, because it doesn't matter at that point if what they believe is real, because they're acting as though it is. And I think that's the most important thing. I kind of touched on that in my evil archaeology when I discussed the existence of demons. It's like, does it even matter if they're real when people go out into the world and do things on behalf of a demon? Like they murder a family and they say it's in honor of Pazuzu, a Sumerian deity. So does it even matter, or can we manifest these things? Can they be like egregore or thought forms? Can we be so strong and powerful with our minds that we can think into existence?
Exorcist opening scene, classic. Pazuzu,
Yes.
right? They were doing a dig right in that area, Iraq.
Yep. Yeah. That was an inspiration for that book. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Oh,
Oh
nice.
yeah. So
Let's get into
I
this
think
too.
I think that they're here. I'll just say that. I think that they're here, and they've been here for a long time. And we're just now going to discover the extent to which they are here and what they're doing.
Right.
But unfortunately, it's going to be filtered through the lens of those who have information and are trying to keep that information from us.
Exactly.
But it's going to be harder to do that, because all of us still have access to the internet. We have access to each other. We have the ability to compare notes and discuss these things. And I think it's important to do that then. And, so who knows? We may discover it.
Do you remember Paul Hellyer, the ex-Canadian Minister of Defense? Paul Hellyer?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I have, and everybody says this kind of shit, but I have 2 minutes. Out of 15 years of broadcasting, I've never kept anything running. And we were talking one night and I forgot to hit the end record or whatever. So anyway, you've heard this kind of story before. Anyway, I got 2 minutes of him talking. And he told me some dark stuff in those 2 minutes. And he was just, I don't know if he knew he was dying, because he died like a year later. I think he did my interview and a couple others after that. And then he passed away, I found out. And I tell you, I've been struggling to let it out or not. It'd be great for the show, right? Put a little bumper up there. Hey, Shadow Nation, and put this out. But it hits me, and I want the truth out. I want to put this out, but it affects even me, Heather, to this point, to where I know how far they reach. Just like I never finished my thought with Thomas Jane that came on. We were talking about Predator. And if you don't think people are listening to you and I right now, I mean, just little podcast, we're talking right now. If you don't think people are listening, you're nuts, because you wouldn't believe how many mentions. The next morning before I woke up, he dropped the bombshell about the Harvey Weinstein, how Hollywood rolled on itself. I appeared in Men's Health magazine. I didn't. They said Shadownationpodcast, but they said Thomas Jane said on Shadownationpodcast. They got to give you credit. And then they put the quote about Harvey Weinstein, Hollywood eating themselves. And then, of course, he dropped a couple bombs on the new Predator movie, some shit that was happening. So I went on some movie stuff too. But they're listening. They listen. There's fillers out everywhere. I don't know if these people are skeptics or however they hide their hat, but they listen to everything. And these red flag words go up, whatever they are, UAP, alien, what. There's certain words that go up, and it flags somebody, and they tune in and they listen. So anyway, I don't know what I'm going to do with that Paul Hellyer stuff, but I think
we'll have to talk maybe after, because I got some stuff too. Maybe there's power in numbers, that's like, because unfortunately I like to feel like I have some courage to be able to talk, but honestly there's things I've held back on because I'm not as courageous. I worry about my family. I worry about things if I were to ever say some of the things that I've been privy to, but I want to so desperately, and that's actually part of the reason I've considered writing a novel. It's a played out kind of technique, but I thought, hey, if I write it in fiction, maybe people have to read
Paul
between the lines.
suggested that I don't put it out when he was alive, and I never have. I mean, it's not.
I gotta know.
It doesn't tell you what the future of mankind, but it's some very interesting stuff, and I'm leaning more towards just putting it out and not even putting my name with it. Just put it out. Paul Hellyer's last 2-minute clip. Because like you said, I make no money from this show. I do it because I love it and I want the truth to come out. And I can't be in Congress because you can't. Unfortunately, somebody's already got the panhandle on that. It's so funny when somebody's pushing for the truth or the To the Stars Academy, or there comes up a movement. It seems like there's always a group of guys that go and they all get together. And nobody else is allowed in, and they want their TV shows out of it. They want their fame, and that's when you start losing me. Because when you start, and I'm all for TV shows and stuff. That's awesome, man. When you start throwing that stuff in, as well as I do, when you sign that document in Hollywood, you lose your voice. You can't say what you're supposed to. You can't say all the things you want to say. They can't see all the things you might find. I think everybody knows that. It's just like an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, except it's with Hollywood. That's just as dirty as our government. So it's so there still's my deal. I'll never get another TV show. But, no, but it's awesome. Let's talk about your evil archaeology. I want to talk about your books. Let's put the clip up there. Evil Archaeology, guys, which is an awesome book. Heather put this one out there. When did that come out, Heather?
Oh, that's been, I want to say like 2019.
Demons, Possessions, and Sinister Relics. Now, this one kind of hit home with me, guys, because longtime listeners to the show know I had the owner of the Dybbuk box, America's Most Cursed Haunted Artifact, now in Zach Bagans Museum in Las Vegas. He came on the show with the box, and my house almost blew up with gas. I had to run my family out in the middle of the night. We had to get a hotel room. My car was struck by lightning, burning everything inside the car but the car itself, all within 15 seconds of ending the interview. So that was something. That was really something. And I always wondered, seems like we lost Heather. So let's try to see if we can get her back in here. We just start talking about the demonic stuff.
It seems like it, right? Like,
Yeah,
gosh, I was about to call, I thought I was looking in my phone. Like I knew you had a number. I was about to call you, but like, thankfully we got it to work. It just wouldn't, like everything went, like even my,
yeah, it just said I lost. I looked down, your camera was gone, everything.
but I thought I could hear you, or at least white noise, but like there was nothing on the screen.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
So I'm gonna put the evil.
Has that ever happened before with the with this? What is a StreamYard? Has that ever happened before?
Never happened to me before.
Okay.
Not on StreamYard.
Okay.
But Evil Archaeology, Demons, Possessions, and Sinister Relics by Heather Lynn, PhD, of course. awesome book. You guys know that I had the experience with the Dybbuk box, so I know this stuff is real. Heather, will you tell us about the book and what you experienced, some of the stuff you studied?
Well, the book started off as I actually have no idea why I wrote the book, to be honest. I want to say I was sort of inspired by the film The Exorcist, which could seem apparent by the cover. If you're a fan of The Exorcist, you'll recognize that that's Pazuzu, which is the demon that is seen in the very beginning of the film, where the archaeologist. Yeah. So that always struck me as interesting, that I was raised Catholic, and so that was the like taboo film. And so of course I saw it when I was like 7. So so I watched that, and I always thought it was interesting how it started with an archaeological dig and this spooky looking, demon. Over time I learned that this was Pazuzu and who that was, and it was just interesting to me. But I had been thinking about like the role of evil in the world, and you know um the role of demons as well, because a lot of my research personally goes into the realm of these so-called discarnate entities. So things like angels, demons, aliens, any of the phenomena like that. So naturally I'm interested in demons, and the Sumerians, and so it just seemed like a fit. And then one day I saw a news story about a guy who changed his name legally to Pazuzu, and he
He's
yeah,
asking for it.
right? So he legally changed his name to Pazuzu, and he um he said he was worshiping these ancient Anunnaki demons and Sumerian gods and a whole host of things that he just sort of mishmashed all together. But he was murdering his neighbors and eating them.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, got to do something. He got he got a band of his friends together that were also feeling maybe disenchanted, and he was living in his mother's house, big surprise.
Did
And
he
so
identify as a Satan worshiper, or
he did not. He identified
all right.
he identified as a follower of a Sumerian demon,
Okay.
Pazuzu.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
So I thought, what is this? So this is such a strange story. So they go and they arrest him, and then they find the bodies buried in the yard and all of this. And but when the police went in and started looking through the house, it was like really disgusting, kind of like a hoarder house. Hey, it was like a hoarder house. And they noticed all sorts of Sumerian demon art and things, and it was just really like there was like cuneiform writing, and so he said that was his religion he was practicing. Well, he goes to prison for he awaits trial, so he's in jail, and his mother was telling everyone, "Oh, you got to help him. He's worried that if he doesn't perform his ritual sacrifice at the full moon, that this demon's going to kill him." And they're like, "Yeah, okay. No, he's not performing a sacrifice, in the jail. So sorry." And so they,
I'm surprised they didn't let him.
I mean, right? It's just civil rights, I guess. So
Yeah.
but they said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And it got really bad. And they had the psychiatrist talking to him, and he's like, no, you don't understand. I have to do this. And they're like, nope, you're not going to do it. He's like, come on, just a squirrel or something. They're like, no, you can't do this. Well, one night in his cell, there were some noises, and the next morning they find him dead. And they don't know why. They don't know what happened. It didn't look like he was murdered. They called it suicide, but he had all these scratches on his body, and it looked like somebody was trying to cut his arm off, and it was pretty gruesome.
No
So
cellmate, no nothing.
no, so he had been alone, and there was nobody in the cell with him, and he died before he could even he didn't face trial or anything. So so this happened, and I was like, wow, that is weird. And I guess what struck me as extra weird was his insistence about the involvement of Pazuzu. And, as someone who studies Sumerian things, I thought, well, that's interesting. And then my mind took me to the Exorcist and that connection. And I just started thinking, it wouldn't even matter if there was a demon commanding him to do these things, because what resulted was that he did demonic things. He did evil things. He murdered and ate people, and he did it in the name of this demon. And so I started wondering about, the history of demonology, but further back than a specific sort of framework of demonology as we would understand it in that religious context. But where did demons come from at all? And, of course, all roads lead to not Rome, but Sumer.
Right.
And I found that the beginning of all of this really does go back to Sumer, where, demons were just an everyday part of life, and they weren't necessarily good or bad. They had the capability of being both, but they're very, very powerful. And so one thing I talk about in the book is the fact that the reason we have so many depictions of Pazuzu is because people, specifically pregnant women, wore Pazuzu amulets around their neck. They had Pazuzu plaques in their baby's room, of all things. And this was because it was known that Pazuzu's wife, Lamashtu, was a demon who could not have children. Later, she'd be the inspiration for Lilith, if anyone's familiar with that. But she couldn't have children, and she was very bitter about those who could. And so she would go and kill babies, or she was the one responsible for sudden infant death or stillborns or this sort of thing. And so, being in a sort of patriarchal society back then, the idea was that, well, we have to keep her in line, and who better to keep her in line but her husband, Pazuzu, who will keep her from killing the babies. And so there's a Mesopotamian hell plaque, as they call it, on display at the Louvre, where it shows Lamashtu kind of reaching out as though she's going to kill a baby, and Pazuzu's followed behind her and whipping her into submission. And so the thing is it was like you'd pit one demon against the other. So you tried to work with the demons. And so you have a lot of recommendations for how to do that, spells and this sort of thing. But it's also where we get the idea of exorcism, which is, I thought, pretty interesting, how some of the things that we would classically think of in a TV sense of an exorcism, where you have a priest looking at a person and saying, what is your name, demon? Tell me your name. That those things actually come from the Sumerian exorcism rites. And the importance of that being that the reason you'd want to know the name of the demon was because it would help you, say, diagnose what the problem was. So their versions of exorcisms and demons, it was like an early medical system, because the priest was also the doctor and the healer. And so you'd have somebody who, say, they were throwing up or running a fever, they weren't feeling well, and they would have a set of symptoms, and you would call the physician priest to come and see what was going on and exorcise that demon or whatever it was that was making them ill. In order to do that, though, you have to know what you're dealing with. And so you demand to know the name. You would note the symptoms and say, well, if someone's possessed with Pazuzu, then often they would throw up or have a fever. Whereas maybe if you were possessed with, Lamashtu, you might have sleepiness or a cough, or, so there were these early diagnostic attributes to the exorcism. And so once you knew the name of the demon, then you would know how to best get rid of it. And it did require this sort of a patient lying down and going through different prayers and rituals. And then also things like elixirs or pills would be taken. In some cases, they would make a clay model out of the demon, and they could offer it beer or some sort of offering. And if that didn't work, if it wasn't going to play nice, then you'd make its other demon that was its enemy. And it would sort of be like a little game of, I don't know, rock'em sock'em robots, which demon's going to win.
Right.
But it was like an early form of medicine. So as silly as it may seem, they were kind of onto something. And so it stayed for a while and allowed them an early system of developing medicine in the way that they did. We know this because they had medical textbooks that were discovered, and they're currently in the British Museum.
So
and we tell you all of those things.
Think the Roman ritual, Heather, came from that?
Yes. Indirectly, I think a lot of aspects of it did. Yeah, because, given the influence that they had, the Sumerians, and say, later they were the Babylonians, and all of those traditions kept going. And then that affected Judaism, Christianity, etc. And so, yeah, I think that there was definitely an effect of those types of things. And how it looks now, different. But yeah, so that kind of struck me as isn't that interesting? So then that got me thinking about, other forms of evil and how people perceive evil based in the things that they find. So I just kind of go through the book and discuss different examples of spooky artifacts or things that make people feel uneasy and why.
Gotta get
Also,
this
how
book.
things
I've
get
read clips.
demonized. Mhm.
Yeah, I got to get this book. I've read clips of it, and I got to get this book. That's just all there's to it.
I had my own experience. I'm not really an experiencer, so to speak. I kind of have a dull life that way. I wish I was one of those people that like I saw things, I don't see anything. But I did have a paranormal, perhaps, again, I don't know. I had an experience while writing this, which is kind of funny because I think of the book as a lighter read. Like it's not, earth shattering.
But you're uncovering. They do
Yeah.
that shit, just like what we had happen here on the show. I'm not saying it's demonic. I'm not saying whatever, but it's very interesting how weird stuff happens when you start
Yeah.
talking about weird topics.
It did. So I'm not familiar with what happened on your show when that you started uncovering things and then you had some strange things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My,
So,
my car was hit by lightning. This was all within seconds after ending the show.
oh,
It's
that's wild.
it started out hearing whispers under the doctor's voice. The owner of the Dybbuk box, Heather, Jason Haxton, the author of the Dybbuk box, and the original owner of the Dybbuk box, came on the show, and we were talking about it. And every time I would go into, and mind you, it's clear as me and you talking right now. Every time I would go into the connection to the Holocaust with this box, because a lady came to America with the box, had teeth, fingernails, hair clippings, all from people that she thought was her family member that died in the gas chambers. So she collected what she could, scooped it up, put it in baggies, put it inside here. Somehow it went from a religious relic. It's an old wine box, and it was used as a prayer box during the Holocaust. But somehow it went from that to a evil thing, and somehow the story is she possessed a Dybbuk in the box. She put a Dybbuk demon, malevolent spirit, whatever. And anyway, the dude told me before I came on the show. He said, "Listen, I've been on, a bunch of shows, and this stuff always happens, and radio interference." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, because we hear so much, being and you're like, "Oh, that's cool, yeah, okay, it won't happen with me, but okay." Dude, the guys, I start talking about it, and every time I start talking about you would hear him fine. Every time I would go to ask him a question, that's all you would hear, and then he'd go back to talking and be fine. I'm messing with the board. I'm trying to get the sound right and everything. And then I started hearing a knock on the wall behind me. My kid's room was behind the studio where I did it down in the basement. And I would hear a faint knock. There was nobody in the room. The kids stayed with their mother through the week. And so long story short, he says, "Hey man, it's not going to let us finish this interview." I said, "I think you're right. I think we have," but I'm still not saying, it's a demon. I'm just like, "I think you're right." So I said, "Let's reschedule. No problem. Sorry, doctor." So we hang up the phone, and my co-host at the time, Nathan, sends me a text message, says, "Bro, my back is on fire." And I said, "What do you mean? Send me, what are you talking about?" And he sends me pictures of his back, and he has black and blue marks about the size of a fist. He has 4 of them on his back. 1, 2, 1, 2 on left side, right side. So I'm thinking allergic reaction to something. And I said, "Well, post it online and say, well, look at this freaky stuff that's happening." Now, of course, I'm not thinking demon. I was thinking weird thing happened, I said, "We'll post it on the website, And he did. And within 15 minutes after that, my car had been hit by lightning. It burnt only the car seat, and the console blew off in the back, burn up and blew off in the back seat. So the insurance company, first off, didn't believe that lightning bolt had hit my car, because rubber tires, of course, don't conduct electricity. And it only burnt my seat and the console. And after that happened, I started smelling gas so strong in the house, I called the gas company, and the gas man came and said, "Dude, hit the road. You got to go. You got to go. The house is full of gas." With the pilot light, everything that should have been on, everything that happened, you just got to put 2 and 2 together, Heather. And at some point, you got to use your brain and go, "Okay, I'm skeptic, but How much is
Yeah.
enough? You know?
Right. How much is enough? Right. I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of reminding me of like what happened when I was writing this book. Like, I wrote it seriously, but I did think of it as kind of fun. Like, for instance, I talk about the Mesopotamian toilet demon. You
Mhm.
know, it's funny, but it's a real thing. It's this idea that there was a demon, and it kind of falls along the line of this connection between exorcisms and healing. So this idea of the toilet demon would attack if you were in a dark place where they're going to the toilet and taking care of business, and sometimes you would like keel over dead, and it
Yeah.
was like the toilet demon would have gotten you. Well, there was a set of like trends you could predict of like who may be most vulnerable to the toilet demon, and it would be something like older male, overweight, so we know now that like you could have a heart attack if you strain too hard in the bathroom, a la
Sure.
what Elvis Presley, as they say,
King, yeah.
the king. He was the cause of death, Mesopotamian toilet demon. So
Right.
um so I mean it's a thing. So it's like it shows insight into their early thinking, but it's kind of funny in a way to call it a toilet demon, but that's what they called it. So I deal with things like this, and then I wouldn't have thought that it would have shaken up anything on like a spiritual level, but I noticed that weird things were happening to me the whole time I started writing this. And I had a lightning experience as well. And I documented it too on my Facebook. I showed a picture because I was like, what? Lightning struck the shed and caused a fire, I believe. It was like a whole thing. And I thought that was wild. Then this is a different time. But while I was writing the book, I had a house fire. There was a surge of electricity in the house where I woke up to it smelled like burning like electric or something like that, and there was smoke everywhere. And I go into the office where I had been writing the book, and there was an outlet, and it was just the whole wall was black, like where the fire was, where the outlet was. But next to that outlet, I had stacks and stacks on the floor of old like collectible National Geographics, and it was, if it would have just gone like, it would have ignited that. I mean, the
Right.
fire, it was a whole thing. And so that was frightening. But then over time too, I started having physical symptoms. Like I started getting a heart issue, like out of nowhere, like but it was specifically electrical, because my heart was fine, but I didn't know that. It took me like months and months to back and forth to the cardiologist. I was jogging once, and then I just like keeled over, but thankfully this was so coincidental. But I had been being followed on the trail by firefighters and EMT, because every Sunday morning they did like a little jogging thing, and they had noticed that I was up ahead of them, and I was kind of like, like not acting right. And so they came up behind me, and I don't even remember, but I just remember kind of like falling over and like, a firefighter catching me. So I was like, oh my gosh. I went to the hospital, and so I had gone through all of this just to find out that they didn't know what was wrong, but there was something going on with the electrical component of my heart, but nothing that they could diagnose. They gave me like a beta blocker and said, well, just take this, and we don't know. And this was at the Cleveland Clinic hospital, heart specialist. So it wasn't like they just didn't know. It was like they truly had no diagnostic reason for why I was going through this. And it was weird. Then I had like my cat die, like all
Oh,
kinds of
shit.
terrible things. Like so many things happened, and I started feeling, and this was weird too. And I didn't attribute it to this book, but like I just started feeling out of sorts. Like I felt not happy, which, I wouldn't go so far as to say I was depressed, but I just wasn't feeling myself, and I wasn't feeling right. And I have no reason for that. There was nothing reasonable. It was just, there was this feeling of darkness over the house. And it just, thing after thing. And I make an account of it I had to add it to the book, because afterward, when I got finished with the book, all of that cleared up. Like everything was fine. The cat dying was a part of that. And it's so I ended up adding that to the end, because I thought, well, you know what? I don't know. This was my personal experience. And so I felt the need to put it in there that, it's more data. But yeah, it was, I didn't intend on taking on any kind of like dark forces, and I didn't do so with any kind of like, seriousness really, or any kind of disrespect or anything that I thought would be harmful. I didn't dabble, as they say. Well, maybe I did by doing this. I don't know. I still question these things to this day, but and maybe it's not even connected, of course, but man, did it just kind of, it was weird, and I closed the chapter on that book and everything was fine. I actually moved. And there's a reason for that too that I discuss in the book as well, based on the advice of somebody, because I had before this, and what I was using to sort of research the book, at a thrift shop, I found an old book on demonology and witchcraft, a very old book. So I don't know, but a friend of mine who was into paranormal said that it could have been that I brought something in with that book, and they recommended that I, sage the place. And I'm like, I ended up just moving. I really did. Wow. I was like, because there's so many things that started happening, and I wanted to move anyway. So it was just, you know what, I'm done. So that was a big life change after that. But like I said, I put it in the afterword of the book because I just thought, I might want to put this in here because weird stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. My God. The demons or whatever are usually more subtle. Like I had Dr. Richard Gallagher on. He's the psychiatrist that has to okay every exorcism done in the United States for the Vatican. He's not an exorcist. He's a psychiatrist. Also, man, he wrote Demonic Foes. So you need to get him on your show too. That'd be awesome.
Oh, definitely.
Love talking to him, and he would love talking to you about your book. But anyway, the after I had him on the show, nobody had been in my car for 3 days. I get in and I noticed the crucifix, my rosary hanging from my rearview mirror. The crucifix, just Christ on the cross, was broken off and gently placed in the passenger side seat. And none of the beads, by ripping that off, the beads, everything should have just exploded. Should have been all over the car. It wasn't. Something just snapped off the Christ, and it wasn't like it was a little hook. This was a knot. This was tied. It was made out of like a twine, and it just snapped off. It was placed in the passenger side. I got pictures on my website. It's little subtle things like that. Yeah. The knocks on the walls, the whispers, undertone, white. I never thought podcasting could be dangerous. There's the name for our book, Dangers of Podcasting. Listen to this, though. I wanted to play you this real quick if you have a minute. I do ghost box stuff. I love it. It's the closest I think we can get to proving the existence of an afterlife. I don't know if it's aliens speaking. I don't know if it's dead.
Can you explain that? I mean, for a little bit more, like unpack that. Like what, how is it that how does it work exactly? Because I think I wrote a little bit about that, and I'm a little bit familiar, but that was a big claim that you think it's really like taps into something. So like what would make you think that it does?
Absolutely. It's I never believed in it before. People like to say audio pareidolia, stuff like that, because the brain's always looking for order and chaos. I'm here to tell you, Heather, that this has we've now reached a point where you can eliminate the skeptics. It deals with, you can monitor it. You scan in milliseconds. So basically it's a radio station and you're turning the dial. So you're going through the radio station. So you do need that. That creates vocal, something from that energy to pull from to create a vocal. I got things on here where you'll hear, there is no death. It'll go with the harmony of the song. So whatever spirit, alien, whatever you're contacting, whatever energy form, it used clearly a harmonic of a song, or it just flows together. There is no death. And I can play that one for you too. And then sometimes you get what I'm getting ready to play for you just now, but you can monitor it in milliseconds and kilohertz. You can now set both. So you know exactly what you're dealing with. And if you get Arby's $12.95, you can get hot fries and wings, and you know what I'm saying? You can tell the difference. And I've been doing it before, and I've been cussed out. I've been called a bastard, and we're not leaving. And then I've had good things, but it's like they say, when you play with the Ouija board, you open up the portal to where I don't know, but
I know that
box. But you judge for yourself. So this one here, it I don't even think I'm going to I should have uploaded it, but I got to play it off my phone. But I was doing a session right here one night. I do it. I usually show the box. I show people what I'm doing. I'm just sitting here in front of a microphone. I put the box up to the microphone and I ask questions to the air. This was kind of emotional because this thing, spirit, whatever, asked me for help. And let's see what you think it says. Hold on one second here. And I'm talking to it because they start messing with me at first. They start getting FUs and fuck off and all this stuff. And I say, you hear me saying, if you're the same group of people I was dealing with last night, I don't want to deal with you no more. And then I get this. People that I was talking to last time, you're definitely not welcome. I'm checking out positive energy tonight only. That's who I want to talk to. Bro, what's up? You aren't welcome if you're the same group of people that I was talking to last time. You're definitely not welcome. I'm checking out positive energy tonight only. That's who I want to talk to. Bro, what's up? Okay, I hate to tell you off bat what it said, but did you hear a man's voice there?
It did sound like a man's voice, and it sounded like it was responding to you when you would speak.
Yeah, it says, bro.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And then I said, bro, what's going on? And it said, Christ never found. So let me play it one more time. I wish I uploaded it. If you're the same group of people that I was talking to last time, you're definitely not welcome. I'm checking out positive energy tonight only. That's who I want to talk to. Bro, what's up? What do you think? What do you think? Think I got something there?
It's spooky. I know that because it does sound like it is responding to you.
It does get spooky. It does. I even got better once. If you go on my TikTok page, they even get clearer and better.
Oh, I think I will. What's your TikTok handle? I'm sure your listeners already know, but I'd like to hear it.
It's just Shadownationpodcast.
Perfect. I'm gonna
go and check it out. I try to do it. I was doing it every night for a while because the more you do it, the more open they get with you, I guess, or they feel your energy or your vibration or whatever. But I got to tell you, there's a danger to it because at the end, I've always said, okay, you guys can't stay here. You know, thanks for talking to me, but I want no energy. Stay here. Go ahead. And I've had them tell me, we're not going, we're not leaving, whatever. So I'll say a little prayer or whatever too. So, you know, it is what it is. I mean, it's voices coming out of thin air, responding to direct questions. And they're using our electronics. They can, and even the Dr. Gallagher that came on the show said demons are notorious for being able to interfere with electronics and things like that. So who knows?
Now you're spooking me a little bit since we have a little electrical like technical difficulty.
That's what I said. Once I seen this one, that's I got this one when I got Gary's new box and I got on there and this lady's having this conversation with me, and when it hits you that you're having a conversation with a dead person, you feel so small. It's like looking at the ocean. You're staring. That's why I love this paranormal stuff, because it constantly keeps me standing on the edge, the abyss of the unknown. And when you're facing that, it can either make you feel small or very, very big. It makes me feel big because I feel like I'm doing something important. So it's, I
envy you. I envy you because I've not had an experience like that. And it sounds like, as a ghost hunter right now, that's probably not the, but as somebody who goes out and actually looks for those experiences and encounters that and has something to report, I think that's fascinating. I've not actually had any of those experiences. Maybe if I had them, I'd be even more open-minded too. Because I'll tell you, I don't know that I believe in ghosts at all. Like that's something that, but again, if I would say believe in, I do have an open mind towards something like interdimensional entities, or so why would a ghost be different than that? I think it's just maybe for me, the cultural framing of it, like, ooh, Casper. And so I think that's probably been a barrier to me exploring that more,
Exactly.
Yeah. So
All you have to do is
you
come
got my
to Indiana.
interest.
I'll take you anywhere you want to go. Just come to Indiana and we'll rock it out. But
That'll be fun.
let me play one more for you. I'm going to try to make a believer out of you.
Okay.
All right. So this is a
I
little
want
bit.
to believe.
I want to believe this is a little bit longer when I first started out. Wait. Okay. We're testing. That's not it. That's not the one. But you can actually tell that I don't believe time's linear. I believe it's parallel, and I do believe in the dimensions, and I believe that's where we exist as spirits when we go. And I believe those dimensions crisscross, just like with the, traveling interdimensional travelers we have. Here's one good for you. This is a short clip. Sometimes they're funny and they'll joke with you, just like they talk about the alien presences. This lady didn't want to talk anymore.
My name's Sean Burris. Trying to communicate with anyone on the other side. How many questions? Well, I do have questions. Once again, my name's Sean Burris. Trying to communicate with anyone on the other side. How many questions?
So there's a clear,
That's a female voice for sure.
female voice.
Yeah.
And you can hear what she says. How many
Yeah.
questions? Because that night I've been
She
asked.
sounds irritated.
Yeah, and they do.
No,
They get irritated. Yeah. How many questions, dumbass?
Right. Like, are we gonna be here? I don't have
I know. Which that's probably what you're saying right now, because I've kept going for a long time. This is what you get, guys, when you get two cool people that just want to talk and hang out. This is what the whole community is about. This is how we learn from each other. And that's why Heather's such a great person, and her books are amazing. And I know we're out of time. We got to wrap it up. But let's talk about here's your latest book that has not been dropped.
Oh yeah, this is new. I haven't told anybody. Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah, this one first. When's that one coming out? The Final Frontier.
This is this is coming out in spring. So I think the date was April. Yeah, on my website you can see the actual date. But yep, in a few more months.
And what's that going to be about?
This one is it's about it's Final Frontier, Xenoarchaeology, and the Interplanetary Search for Lost Civilization. So it's kind of self-explanatory, maybe, but it's about basically the idea of us going into space and looking for things. It's working under the assumption that perhaps there have been civilizations on other planets before us. And so it's a question. It offers some research, interviews with scientists about what that would look like, about how we would be able to go to space at all. I mean, there's obviously barriers to this type of research, but what are people actually doing now? Because there are programs, and there have been programs developed with this idea in mind, that there could be something found. And, just like we were kind of discussing about Grush and, the idea that perhaps there's, there's a lot that has come out in these testimonies about, he can't really say exactly, but there has been a suggestion that we know of things like craft that are on other planets, that there has been evidence elsewhere, not just here. And so that was something that sort of came out in all of this. And again, it's real vague because he's limited with what he can say and whatnot. But that kind of falls along the lines of what I've written about, which is this notion that there are people and there are programs, and this is widely available information, that have tried to figure out how we could go and search for lost civilizations on other planets. And also, what's the problem with that? Like, what problems could come about in terms of ethics? So, like, who owns these discoveries? There's a space law center that has made a whole, a framework, an ethical framework to address these questions. But there's so many issues that come about, and so there's legal questions, there's technical difficulties, so to speak, about what it would take, and then also, what does that mean for our belief system? What will that mean for us? And so clearly that there's no evidence that we've been able to do an excavation on another planet, but why not? What's stopping us? And there are some answers to that. And there are people who are out there who are, very well funded, who are trying to do that very thing. And so I just try to expose some of that and show that this is a developing field, and it has to be, because people are going interstellar, and this is something that we're on track to do. And what's going to happen when, and I'm not saying if, I'm saying when, it does come down to finding evidence of not just life on another planet, but civilized life. What's that going to mean for us? What will that mean for our world religions? What will that mean at all? And what are the barriers to us getting there? And what will it open up? And have they already found some of these answers? And so there's many questions around this, but that's essentially what the book is about. Space archaeology, which it's not. Space archaeology is a term that references the study now of the debris left behind in space, so like space junk or things on the moon. So xenoarchaeology is actually an academic term that's been proposed as the appropriate way to address this particular field of study that's emerging.
Well, I think it's amazing. And your newest book that you kept hidden until seconds before the show, guys, so I couldn't upload the picture. What's
brand new?
What's that one going to be about? Because that looks dark.
It looks dark, yeah. It is dark, I guess. It's about Baphomet, specifically the entity that is Baphomet. It is a sort of condensed history of Baphomet, the icon, and its origins and the role that it plays in contemporary society and perhaps the future, which sounds kind of wild, but there's a lot of myth surrounding Baphomet, rightfully so. It's a frightening looking figure, and that's I'll just say this: its history is surprising. It has a very old history that is connected to the Knights Templar, and I reference that in the book. I discuss the Templar trials. That's one of my sources that I use, were the actual transcripts from the trials, which describe Baphomet and the worship of Baphomet, or at least the accused worship of Baphomet. And then later, though, and so we don't have an image of Baphomet from that. That's just all in the writings of the trial. So then there's a big gap between the 1300s and when we see Baphomet come along, which is in the 1800s. And this image of Baphomet that we're all sort of roughly familiar with, the iconic image that's usually a drawing, comes from an occultist who, surprisingly, was a French priest. And he drew Baphomet as a sign of true Catholicism. And when you unpack the meaning behind Baphomet, you find that this was a religious symbol that was supposed to bring about a new appreciation for the grand love of God and God's forgiveness and Christianity and all of these things, right? And now I'm not suggesting that, this is this beautiful thing and we should all wear Baphomet,
Right.
shirts or whatever. But I'm just pointing out this sordid history of this image and how surprising the twists and the turns are. And how did it go from being something involving the Knights Templar to magic, to Catholicism, to also a strange little, foray into socialism. And then, now we look at it as, again, maybe like the hot topic level occultist symbol of the goat of Mendes and all of this. Right. What is that? Why is it used to this day? There's a lot in the news where people in, say, the Church of Satan are putting monuments of this.
The guy cut the head off. The congressman cut the head off of the statue.
Exactly. And so, how is it that this image of this kind of creature, we'll say, how is it that it was a Catholic icon of God's forgiveness and beauty and love?
Right.
And then how did it turn into something evil, or was it evil all along? And so what I do in the book is I try to unpack the very complicated and sordid, powerful imagery of Baphomet and explain just a general history of it. And then also hopefully explain why we shouldn't be afraid of it. And that doesn't mean I'm suggesting we should then embrace it and love it and call it our own, but it's the importance of saying, let's not have fear. Let's understand something, because fear, as you know, dealing with the paranormal, when you have fear and you go into something fearful, it leaves you vulnerable, leaves you open to those things. And so, like in my book, Evil Archaeology, I talked to exorcist and I talked to paranormal investigator. And, that was something that came about over and over again, is faith over fear. Whatever the faith is, just this feeling of positivity and keeping faith alive as opposed to fear. Don't let it in. That's an old trope of vampires, demons, all of that, is that you still have free will to not let the evil in. You have to choose to let it in. So at the end of the day, if you're fearful, if you're afraid of something, you're going to be more vulnerable to suggestion, and you may let something in. And so my goal with the book was just to give a true history of this icon, explain its role now in the world, and maybe demystify it a little bit so that if you gaze upon it, you can just kind of say, I know what's up with this, and I'm not afraid.
Did I not explain to you I'm an unpaid podcaster? Now I got to go to Amazon and order all these damn books you've written. Oh my God. Now I need sponsors. Listen, anybody, I need sponsors out there. I got to buy Dr. Heather's book.
I will be sending them all to you for sure.
Oh man, I got to read it. Those are amazing. But I tell you what, Dr. Heather, I know we got to go, but I'm so proud and happy to call you my new friend, and the things you say are amazing. And I think you are part of the movement, which is the little people like us that are moving things forward. The truth's going to come out, but it's going to come out through people like us, because the government are only going to go as far as the NDAs allow, the non-disclosure agreements, because they know they will die. People like me and you have no leashes. They can put black helicopters or men in black at the door, knocking on the door, whatever, but they can't stop us from researching, and they can't stop us. Here's the best thing, guys. They can't stop us from asking why. They can't stop us. So keep asking, everybody. And Doctor, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to come on here and speak to you and your audience. It's been really fun. I really love the show, and I love that we've connected. And because I want to pick your brain about all sorts of things about ghosts. You're the first person I've met that's sort of convinced me to at least now look at the ghost situation a little more seriously. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And I will hit you up too, because you said you're in Indiana. I'm in Ohio, so that's not far.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Well, hang on the phone. Let me close out the show and we can talk a little more.
All right.
All right, guys. We're going to close out the show, but I just want to say keep your eyes on the skies, guys, and never sell out from telling the truth. Okay, everybody, make sure to catch us next week. We'll be back at the same time on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern time. That's Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Dr. Heather, what was your website?
www.drheatherlynn.com.
drheatherlynn.com. Make sure you move over there, guys. Make sure you get all her books because they are amazing. And you want to follow her on social media and make sure you keep an eye on her because she's got the scoop on what's going on, everybody. So from the Crossroads of America, this has been another exclusive Shadow Nation interview. Don't go changing America. You know I won't. Why is that? Huh? Because I can't find a slide. Because I love you guys. Everybody have a good night.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Stop this. A UFO.